The International Sex Survey showed the prevalence of people who meet the criteria for compulsive sexual behaviour disorder was 4.8%. Gambling addiction, or the people who meet the criteria, is about 3.1%. So more than 25% more are struggling with porn addiction or sex addiction, or whatever you want to call it. Perhaps the biggest misconception is that it is about sex. If it was simply about having a high sex drive, you'd be looking at porn for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, not for hours and hours and hours at a time. It's a behaviour that's being used to comfort those uncomfortable feelings. At the moment, we have no kind of educational program around the risks of porn addiction. We all know alcohol and drugs can become addictive. With pornography, there are still many, many, many people becoming addicted purely because they didn't know they could.
Dr Paula Hall, welcome to The Meaning of Men. What is your primary mission in the work that you do?
This is going to sound really grandiose, but bear with, but to save lives. I think my experience of working with sex and porn addiction is that it so often robs people of the kind of life that they want to lead. So I don't necessarily mean kind of as in life-saving, but so often it robs people of the relationships they want to be in, the kind of lifestyle they want to lead, the kind of sex life they want to enjoy. And actually getting into recovery from addiction is in many senses about getting your life back. And certainly through a lot of the feedback we've had on Pivotal and the feedback we get at the Laurel Centre, that is what recovery feels like. It's like being born again and kind of, just getting your life back. So, so there you go, save lives.
Tell us about the journey that's led you to doing what you do today. What's what brought you to this stage, and what are your qualifications in the space?
So, psychotherapy counselling is a relatively new profession for someone who's nearly 60. So when I was at school, this certainly wasn't something. Can you imagine? I was going to be a sex therapist. Can you imagine trying to go to careers advice 40 years ago and saying that wouldn't have happened. I had, I think, what's known as a portfolio career up until having my kids. And it was then that I gave up a very, very full-time job doing marketing in the IT industry. Those that have only just tuned in now, I was struggling with the IT to get on, so slightly ironic. Marketing in the IT industry. And then when I gave up full-time work, that's when I started training to be a therapist, to be a counsellor. And I started off in drug and alcohol addiction, and then I trained with Relate as a couple counsellor, and then trained as a sex therapist. And I guess it was my work as a sex therapist where I first started meeting people with compulsive sexual behaviours. So believe it or not, that's going back before everybody had a smartphone. So that was when it was primarily kind of Michael Douglas era, where it was visiting sex workers and stuff like that. And basically, since the iPhone, I mean, it just happened. I kind of got into this market, if you like, just when the tech was really taking off, and we ended up having pornography available at the touch of a button. And that's when I sort of started to specialise, because I was seeing more and more and more of this problem, and there were very, very few people working in this field. And I think what I saw was that I would see some addiction therapists saying, well, it's just the same as drugs and alcohol, so I can work in this. And because of my background as a sex therapist, I was like, well, it's not the same as drugs and alcohol, because that's abstinence, basically. This is not about abstinence. And then the other thing I saw was there was sort of some sex therapists saying, well, I can work with this, we just need to build a better sex life. But they didn't really understand about compulsivity. They didn't really understand that bit. You asked me about qualifications in this. I've got a single qualification, but the reason I haven't is because I developed the training program that's most widely available in the UK. So with a colleague, Nick Turner, we wrote the accredited diploma in working with sex and porn addiction. I'm a qualified therapist, I should say. I've got all those qualifications. But in terms of this, we wrote the diploma, which means you can't do it if you wrote it. So I always say everyone in my team is actually more qualified than I am. But it's a constant learning curve because we are learning more about this as the research keeps coming out. We're learning more and really beginning to understand these behaviours and the way in which it affects people. So it's it's an ongoing journey.
This is such a huge topic, and I've only recently started to understand just how big it is. And you're going to share some stats and figures with us later just to illustrate the gravity of it. But it feels like such an important conversation to have. It feels like there's a lot of taboo around it, and stigma attached to it. And I think only by having these open and educated conversations, we can start to really identify what's going on and starting to help people. So, really fascinated to dive into this with you in more detail. I think the logical place to start probably is with the basic question, I guess. What exactly is a porn addiction, and how would it be defined clinically?
Okay, so in a nutshell, it's a behaviour. It's when you're porn use, and of course, for some people, that's gone on to webcam stuff. It's it's gone into the OnlyFans. It's gone into the chat. It's gone into adult apps. It's a porn often is a bit like the gateway drug, but it's kind of any sexual behaviour really that feels out of control and has significant harmful consequences. And in spite of those, you can't stop. And that really is basically the definition of an addiction. It's something that's causing you a lot of harm, but in spite of that, you can't stop. There are all sorts of biological components that we know about around addiction, but they're not really very helpful for diagnosis. At the moment, we can't do a blood test and tell you whether or not you're an addict. That will probably come at some stage, or a brain scan or something. We certainly haven't got that research at the moment. In terms of the accurate clinical definition, the accurate clinical definition is CSBD, compulsive sexual behavior disorder. So that's what the World Health Organization calls it. So technically, it's not an addiction. Technically, at the moment, it's listed as an impulse control disorder rather than an addictive disorder. But there's tons of research going on at the moment. I was just looking at this literally this morning, actually. So there's about 17 research papers now saying that it really needs to be moved to addictive disorders as they've kind of learnt more about the background psychology, and they've looked more at what's happening in the brain, particularly with this behaviour. There's more and more recognition that this is a lot more similar, bad English anyway, a lot more similar to gambling addiction than it is to any kind of impulse control disorder. So with impulse control disorders, you've got things like pyromania and kleptomania. Yeah. And one of the key differences with those is people don't engage in those behaviors initially as a source of pleasure. Whereas with all addictions, initially, early stages, you're looking for pleasure, whether that's through alcohol, drugs, losing yourself in gambling, whatever it might be. It starts off as pleasure seeking, but over time, as the addictive process really kicks in, it becomes much more what you do just to feel normal. So you end up looking at porn for 3 hours because it's Wednesday and it's what you do on Wednesday. You start looking at porn for a couple of hours before you go to sleep because it's what you always do before you go to sleep. And it kind of becomes so ritualized and so habituated that it ceases being something that's pleasurable. So again, one of the clinical hallmarks is that there's a diminished pleasure response. That's how it's the World Health Organization refer to it. There's a diminished pleasure response. So one of the ways that if you're kind of listening to this and wondering whether or not, how do I know whether I'm addicted? It's probably because actually not only are you having more and more harmful consequences of this, but actually don't even enjoy it much anymore. At the end, you're like, oh, I've just wasted 3 hours. Why have I done that? Why have I done it again? Because you say, no, I'm not wasting time tonight. I'm not doing that. No, when I get home tonight, I'm going to, I don't know, tidy up my sock drawer or whatever. Tonight, I'm not going to do that. And you still do. And you think, and why did I do that? I didn't even really want to do it. Didn't particularly enjoy it, but I still did it anyway. So that diminished pleasure response is also a really, really important hallmark.
Interesting. And give us an idea of the size and scale of this issue. I mean, you were saying there that it's still not recognized as an addiction, but I wouldn't imagine that's because it's not extremely prevalent and common. So what does it look like in terms of the numbers of how big a problem this is?
Well, the good thing about when CSBD was accepted by the World Health Organization was that it meant that actually research could properly be done. We didn't really have much research on this until the last 4 or 5 years. So even though it's been, the problem's gradually been escalating, we weren't able to do the research because it wasn't recognized as a condition at all, let alone what type. So now there's been considerably more research. One of the research projects was something called the International Sex Survey, and that was done across 42 countries with over 80,000 participants. So that is one hefty piece of research. And worldwide, that showed the prevalence of people who meet the criteria for CSBD was 4.8%. So just under 5%. And in the UK, it's 4.6%. So Turkey was the highest. Don't know why, but Turkey was very high up there. And I can't remember where UK was. I think the Americans beat us, but that's probably nothing new. But yeah, the UK unfortunately was pretty high up at 4.6%. And to put that in some kind of context, so gambling addiction, so gambling is recognised as an addiction. Gambling addiction, or the people who meet the criteria for gambling addiction, is about 3.1%.
Wow.
So it's about 25, more than 25% more that are struggling with problematic pornography use or porn addiction or sex addiction or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, it's a big problem.
Wow. And again, just not anything that's really spoken about that much, but you're saying it's almost as prevalent as something, or more prevalent than something like gambling. I think I find that really, really fascinating. And again, just recently I've been learning about the volume of search terms around porn addiction, and how do I get over porn addiction is just huge.
Yeah.
So we've spoken about the what. I guess the next logical question is the why. So why do men get addicted to porn? And again, my understanding is it's significantly more men that get addicted to porn than women. Women can, from my understanding, but it's much more likely to be men. So why is that?
So the first thing to say about that is men get addicted more than women, full stop, across all addictions. I think, well, technically shopping addiction is not recognised as an addiction yet, but people think online shopping is probably going to become an addiction, and guess what? Women will probably beat you on that one. But apart from that, the eating disorders tend to be more common in women, but addictions, whether it's behavioural, so certainly we know gambling is more prevalent in men, but the addictions, alcohol, drug addiction, gambling addiction, sex and porn addiction, all more prevalent in men. Why is that? There's a whole number of different reasons why that might be. There might be something to do with men generally being less risk averse than women are. Generally, on the whole, there's sort of a character trait, tend to be more risk takers. But I think there's also a lot in there about the way that men are kind of socialized, that actually if you've got problems, if you've got difficulties, if you're struggling, it's not okay to reach out for help. So really, addictions become whatever addiction is, it becomes a way of managing uncomfortable emotions. It becomes an anesthetic for the difficulties and challenges in life. And men are probably more likely to turn to things for comfort than people. That is something I hope will change in the future. I think, the fact that, you're doing this podcast at all, we are talking so much more about men's mental health, and that is brilliant. So I really, really hope that there's going to be new generations of boys becoming men who actually do not fall into the trap of addiction because they find other things. I think when it comes specifically to porn, we know that men on the whole, and I'm making broad generalizations, but on the whole, men are more visually stimulated than women are when it comes to sort of sex and sexuality. So most porn is directed at men. And there's quite a big piece of research that came out recently, and I won't be able to quote the last line quite right, but the final line was something like, what the research showed was, ironically, pornography is produced predominantly by men and for men, and has the biggest negative consequences on men. So when you look at the impact of pornography, and this wasn't just porn addiction, this was pornography generally, there are more harms around porn for men than there are for women, even though it's generally made by men for men. So go figure that one.
I was just thinking back to the numbers actually as you were talking there, and I was wondering whether something like a porn addiction, you might be less likely to share that or even understand that you have it as opposed to something like a gambling or an alcohol addiction. So actually, those numbers might be even higher, really.
That's a really, really good point. So that we at the moment we have no kind of educational program around the risks of porn addiction. Yeah, you're not. We all know alcohol and drugs can become addictive. Yeah, and you can't get access until, well, technically you shouldn't have access to drugs, but you don't get access to alcohol till you're 18. There are warnings on the bottle, obviously the same as cigarettes, nicotine as well. With gambling, now the gambling industry has got more responsible. Some would dispute that, but there are the gambling aware campaigns going on. Take if you're not having fun, take a break, or all the different sort of slogans that are going out. So we kind of recognise that one. With pornography, there are still many, many, many people becoming addicted purely because they didn't know they could. And while there are still people out there disputing whether it even exists, that also creates a loophole. Well, we don't even know if it really is addictive yet. So, does it really matter? So I think, yeah, people also get addicted because of the of lack of education and information around it. But also the other thing with pornography that is quite different is that you often don't get the side effects in the same way. So if you're drinking a lot of alcohol, you get a hangover. Yeah, you're taking a lot of drugs, you got to come down, and your skin starts looking crap. If you're gambling, you're going to start hitting financial hardship pretty quick. Porn could be a long old time before you actually notice any harmful consequences. If you're not in a relationship, if you're single, you you're probably not going to identify anything, assuming you're paying for it, you're not going beyond what you can afford, maybe for a long time.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And given that there is a lot of education going on at the moment around porn addiction, what are some of the common misconceptions that you tend to come across that you think is worth addressing?
Well, the first one is that it doesn't exist. Like I said, technically it's not an addiction. That's not the right classification, but that doesn't mean it's not a problem. We do know that it is a disorder. It is a problem, but there are still some people disputing that anybody has a problem with this. And I think, one of the challenges that kind of feeds into that is the kind of moral issues. Whenever we start talking about sex and sexuality, there's a moral element that comes in. Are we just having this podcast because actually secretly we want to ban pornography for our hidden religious agenda, or something like that? So I think, and those same kind of moral issues don't really come in with anything else. You can be very worried and anxious about alcohol and how much you drink alcohol, how much your partner drinks, the impact of alcohol on us as a society, and still have a gin and tonic this evening. Yeah, it's not seen as a contradiction. It's fine. It's absolutely fine. We make very clear distinctions between recreational use and problematic use and addictive use. Clearly there's the people in denial, but we don't yet do that with sex and porn. So there are people who think if you're talking about sex and porn addiction, you must be anti-porn, and that simply is not the case. And I suppose also part of that one, perhaps the biggest misconception is that it is about sex as opposed to it being about mood modification. So, and this happens with clients as well. Quite often I get clients saying, well, I think I've just got a high sex drive, but that's like someone who's clinically obese saying, I think I'm just hungrier than most people. Yeah, it's not about appetite. If it was simply about having a high sex drive, you'd be looking at porn for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, job done, thank you very much. I think you know what I mean. Thank you, that's it, over, game over. Not for hours and hours and hours at a time. So the problem is, the why is that it's a behavior that's being used for comfort, to comfort those uncomfortable feelings, used as a way to get to sleep, used as a way to manage anxiety, low self-esteem, as a way to an anger management tool, stress management. So often it's about stress management, the way to postpone doing something you don't really want to do, part of procrastination. It's very rarely actually about sex and about sex drive and about horniness.
Yeah, I remember listening to an interview with Terry Crews, the actor, a while ago, which is where it started to first get onto my radar. And the thing that really stood out for me, or one of the things, was, as you just said there, it's hours. It's like a day that he was spending, and I guess people that are addicted to porn spend watching it. And as you said, if it was just for one thing, then you'd be, it wouldn't be anywhere near that kind of time. So there's
Exactly.
obviously something else going on. The other thing that you got me thinking about a little bit, actually, the differences maybe between porn addiction and maybe something like a drinking addiction, is that there's like a social element to something like drinking. So it can start off with just going with friends and having a drink. Even with gambling as well, you can go to a casino with friends and gamble to a certain degree. Whereas I guess there isn't really that side with porn. You might watch it, I guess, with a partner every now and again, but it's not the same as something like going for a drink or going to the casino
Yeah.
occasionally. So I can see how you might think about it slightly differently.
But also with a lot of the gambling sites, and it is about community, and gaming
Yeah.
addiction and gambling addiction. There is a community, an online community element to it. And that is true for some, not many that I work with, but that is certainly true with some of the people I work with porn addiction. And particularly when it has got onto the webcam stuff, it is actually about the connection. They will have their favourite porn star, content creator that they're following on Twitter and TikTok, if this allowed it, and whatever else. And actually there is a sense that there's a relationship with this person. And some people, particularly if you're into a particular kind of fetish type of behavior, you might be part of an online community of people that are in that. So for some people, it is about connection, and definitely the people I work with, where it's become about sex workers, it's frequently about wanting the validation, wanting the acceptance, wanting to be the center of attention, wanting to be to feel important and valued. You have to pay for that, but there's often a lot of kind of relational, or what we'd call attachment issues, that are going on in it as well.
You were talking earlier about the fact that with a alcohol addiction, for example, there are very obvious signs, i.e., you can wake up with a hangover the next day. What are some of the early warning signs that you might be starting to go towards a porn addiction?
Spending more time than you want to or intended. So you think, I'm going to go on for 10 minutes, half an hour, and then I'll go and do such and such. And before you know it, just 5 more minutes, 5 more minutes, 5 more minutes, and tons of time has gone. Escalating to types of pornography that you're not really sure are your taste. So it's like, why am I looking at this stuff? I'm not even really kind of into this. And with alcohol, it's a bit like the person who just keeps on drinking and starts drinking the tequila at the back of the cupboard just because at least it's alcohol, even though they don't particularly like it. So sort of noticing that you're getting into stuff that you don't really think is your thing. Increasingly lying about it or being hidden about it. So maybe you got a willing sexual partner, but actually I think I'll just log on and look at porn instead, and kind of hiding and lying about that. Also kind of withdrawing from other things. So I've certainly heard guys saying, everybody else was going on to a club and I decided to go home and look at porn. Everyone else was saying, let's go. Oh, actually, and I decided to go back, being late for things because you were still online. So it's kind of crossing all your own boundaries. For some people, particularly those that are in a relationship, it's very much noticed that they know that they are doing it to an extent that their partner wouldn't like. So they really are beginning to hold secrets. Now, we're all entitled to our privacy, yeah, when it comes to our masturbatory lives, we're allowed our privacy. But if you are really consistently and ongoing basis hiding kind of what you're doing and really, really being very, very secretive about it and feeling bad about it, that could be a sign. The other one is if you start noticing that when you are with your partner, you're finding it harder and harder to reach climax, or harder, excuse the pun, to get an erection, or harder to get in the mood in the first place. And all of that, what we know tends to happen with pornography is you get so used to that heightened arousal that no partner can compete with the novelty of porn. Yeah, no partner. And you get so used to that really, really high level stimuli that when you're with your partner that absolutely would have floated your boat however long ago, it's just not doing it anymore. So you find yourself having to drift off into fantasy or something like that.
Before we dive back into the episode, if you're enjoying these conversations, please do hit that subscribe button and leave a review. These two actions really make a huge difference and help the show reach more people who can benefit from these discussions. Let's keep building this community together. Thanks for being part of it. Back to the episode.
Yeah, that almost, or for me, it might have fallen into one of the misconceptions around watching a lot of porn might increase your sexual appetite. But what you were saying there, you're almost setting unrealistic expectations, because I guess the deeper you get into the addiction, potentially the more kind of extreme or novel things that you'd have to watch to get that like sense of pleasure. It's maybe there's like a dopamine effect there in terms of like your baseline of what's actually doing it for you is just going to increase. Yeah. And it gets to the point obviously where it's just unrealistic. What other, you were starting to touch on obviously some of the things there, how it can affect a romantic relationship. What other ways might it start to feed into what's happening there with your partner?
I think it is beginning to withdraw more from the relationship, and sometimes it's developing an addiction is a really slow process. Yeah, you don't just kind of wake up one day and go, you know what, I think I'm going to put, or you don't just go from recreational use and the next day, bam, you're addicted. It's like a dimmer switch. It's very gradual. It builds up over time. But sometimes that build up may have happened because you are having issues in your relationship, or you were dumped by an ex, or that there are issues and concerns that might be contributing to it. But even when those problems have gone away, or maybe rather than addressing those issues, you find yourself turning to porn and those behaviours instead. So really, I think when you're doing it, you're withdrawing more and more from the relationship, not just sexually, but probably just physically, generally, avoiding situations where in the past you might have been sexual. So, not tonight, dear, I've got a headache, or actually I'm going to get up and go for a 5-10K run rather than the usual Sunday morning lie-in and that sort of thing. I think when you are beginning to withdraw, and it's worth asking yourself, is this coinciding with an increase in porn use? And I think also what a lot of guys say is when they start worrying that their porn use might be affecting their erections, it definitely does, because then on top of potentially any biological connection, and the jury's still out on whether or not that's the thing, but you've got kind of the performance anxiety as well. You've got the shame that you feel around your hidden use. You've got, your partner's like, yay, finally, I thought you'd forgotten me. And you're like, oh, shit, I hope everything goes okay. And that in itself then becomes what causes the problem.
Yeah, there are so many things going on, isn't there? And I was thinking of the word before you said it, but the word shame may be around watching porn, which is one thing. But then there's also the performance aspect as well, and the pressure to perform. So there's so many things going on. What are some of the other psychological effects that a porn addiction can have on men?
Let me just say something about the shame, if I may. The shame isn't necessarily that you think watching porn is wrong, or the type of porn you're watching is wrong, which it might be. It's more the dependency on it, and you're hiding it, and you're lying about it. So it's not necessarily shame that porn is wrong. It's shame that I have become a liar, a cheat, a fraud. I'm being really disingenuous about it.
Well, that's
Are there,
interesting. And men might actually see this as cheating potentially in a
I
way.
think they do if they know they've got and partners certainly can do, if they know that their partner would really like to have sex and they're going, oh, actually, no, I'm not in the mood. But you're then choosing, effectively to have sex with the screen instead. I
Mm.
suppose it's a breach of trust
Mm.
because you're any holding any big secret or allowing your partner to assume it's stress at work again, and it's damn well it's not. So it's all those unspoken things, those lies of omission.
Interesting. And then building on that, what are some of the other psychological impacts that the porn addiction can
I
have?
think it often comes because of that increase in independency, and I think ironically, generally, like as I was saying earlier, people engage in these behaviours as a way of escaping uncomfortable emotions. But you're feeling anxious and you're feeling really stressed about work, so you spend hours and hours on looking at porn. And then you start feeling really anxious about how much time you're spending on porn, or you're anxious about a work deadline, but rather than cracking on doing the work, you end up looking at porn, which makes you more anxious. Or you feel depressed and you feel lonely, you feel bad about yourself, maybe a relationship's recently ended or something, so you start looking at porn. Because you're spending so much time looking at porn, you start feeling lonely, depressed, and bad about yourself, because you start thinking, what have I become? So quite often the very emotions that people are trying to escape, it actually creates more of it. And we talk about that as this sort of feeding cycle. Whatever you're trying to escape from, it tends to create even more of that emotion. But I think the biggest one does come from that sense of dependency. It is that withdrawing from people, and then in terms of your self-esteem, it's what I hear guys saying is that they get more and more self-doubt. Would you really like me if you knew? So people are going, oh, Simeon, he's a great guy, he's a brilliant number one geezer doing that, and you're going, yeah. Would you really think that if you knew why I was 2 hours late tonight? Yeah, so it's that kind of self-doubt which really starts questioning self-esteem. And also just not being able to get a grip, because we all think that with addictions, don't we? You think, oh, for goodness sake, just get a bloody grip. Just stop. Just pull yourself together and just bloody stop. Get a grip. And then you fail again. And that is so, dispiriting. It really is. Yeah.
You were talking about self-worth, and I was also thinking self-identity as well, which is a big theme in this podcast. Looking for your sense of identity, your sense of worth, your sense of purpose. And I guess this all kind of like feeds in and slowly pulls you down in those aspects as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I'm known for in this industry is that I don't ever call my clients addicts, and I don't ever refer to them as addicts. And the books that I've written and in the Pivotal podcast series never refer to clients as an addict. And quite aside from whether it's an addiction or not, I think it's really unhelpful to label yourself as that, because I think addiction, whether it's chemical, behavioural, whatever it is something that you have, not something that you are. So I don't believe in, for example, if people who go to 12-step will often say, hello, my name's Dave and I'm an alcoholic, or I'm a drug addict, I'm a sex addict. You'll know people that have worked with me because they'll say, hello, my name's Dave and I have porn addiction, rather than I am a porn addict. I absolutely do not believe it is your identity. And it's, in terms of recovery, it's really important to be able to separate yourself from that kind of thinking and go, no, this is a problem that I'm facing right now. And this is something that I am going to fight. And this is something that I'm going to overcome. Might be a bit of a battle at times, might be difficult, might be some, slips along the way, but this is not who I am. This is something that I'm currently struggling with, and I will get over and I will move on from.
We were talking about some of the impacts on your romantic relationships. What about if you're a father and you have children? What kind of impact can that have on your relationship with them and how you show up, I guess, as their father as well?
It's an interesting question. I think it varies, and this is relevant to the romantic relationships as well. So I mean, there are certainly people out there who are incredibly good at compartmentalizing. Yeah. So actually, when they're online looking at porn, or going out visiting sex workers, cruising, whatever it might be, when they're doing that, they're doing that. But when they're with their partner at home with their kids, they're at home with their partner and they're with the kids. And those two worlds never collide. They are completely separate. So those people genuinely can say, it doesn't have any impact on my partner and it doesn't have any impact on my kids. And that's certainly much easier to kind of maintain that really strict split if, for example, you only act out, as we sometimes call it, when you're away. So if you're away 4 nights a week, or we've worked with a lot of people in the armed forces. So when you're out on tour and you're actually gone for a few months, that's what you do. But when you get home and you are back to being a partner and a dad, you're back to being a partner and a dad, and you do not think about the other stuff. Genuinely, it's not there. So there are definitely those people where it has minimal effect on partner and children until a partner finds out. Then those worlds massively collide. But until then, it really has no impact. But for others, there is a sense that they notice that they are spending less time with their children because they're doing that. The identity issue you just talked about, there's a sense of an impact on their self-esteem. I'm not sure I really want to be. I wouldn't want my son to grow up doing some of this stuff. I definitely wouldn't want my daughter, assuming you're heterosexual, wouldn't want my daughter to know that I was looking at this kind of stuff. And actually what I'm looking at, they are someone's daughter. Or if you're gay, they are someone's son. And actually, I'm not sure how I feel about that. I don't think I'd want any of my kids going into this industry. So it can raise all sorts of kind of questions and self-doubt.
I think up until now in the show, we've done a really good job of shining a light on what a porn addiction is and some of the impacts of that. I want to pivot now and talk directly to anyone who's listening that might be suffering from a porn addiction and start to talk about some actionable steps and things that they can do. Before we get into that, I'd love to hear of any stories that you might be able to share of men that you've worked with, that you've helped take them from having a porn addiction to hopefully coming out the other side.
Gosh. Right at the beginning, when you asked me kind of what my primary mission was in this work, and I said life-changing, that is probably the most common feedback that we get. This has been life-changing. So, yeah, I mean, just the two biggest pieces of work that I'm probably directly involved in. One is running the residentials at the Laurel Centre. So that's a 6-day residential kind of rehab for people with this problem. And at the end of the 6 days, the feedback we get from the guys, and we've done this with, literally hundreds of people been through our course now, is that, this has just been a life-changing experience. And that's not just in terms of stopping the behaviour, but really beginning to understand themselves. And I think that's often one of the biggest challenges is people going, why do I not just bloody pull myself together? Why do I keep doing this when I don't even enjoy it anymore? And when they're able to put the pieces of the puzzle together and go, oh gosh, that's why, that insight is, can be life-changing. And also beginning to recognize just how much the behavior and the increasing compulsivity has started contaminating other areas of life, and really being able to kind of claim those areas of life back. But we get that with pivotal recovery as well. People saying, I understand myself better than I have done in years. Getting back in touch with vision. I do loads of stuff on vision and what do you want for your life and who do you want to be. The whole vision and identity piece is really, really important. I mean, it's obviously it doesn't work for everybody, but thankfully those people generally don't write to me and tell me that it didn't work. We tend to hear much more from those where it's been hugely successful. And you were talking earlier about the kind of misconceptions of this addiction, and again, it's and how do you know when you're an addict? It's just not fun anymore. It's a burden. It's a weight. It is something that you would take any magic pill to get rid of. Any magic pill. That's when you really know. And yeah, seeing people go through that process is real privilege. Is fantastic.
So I'm listening, and I'm suffering from a porn addiction. And I've got to that stage, as you were saying there, where it's just become a burden. It's not enjoyable anymore. It's taking over my life. It's maybe starting to bleed into other aspects of my life. I can't keep the two worlds separate. What are some of the first steps that I need to take to get on the road to recovery?
So first thing I'll say, I rewind. If you are in that place, then it's slightly different. If you're someone listening thinking, I think I might be getting to that stage where I might be, or I want to make sure that this never gets to that. Because I think what happens there is, and so it's exactly the same with other addictions, starts as recreational, then becomes a little bit more like heavy use, problematic drinking, a little bit too much. Some people then manage to kind of swing back a bit, but others, it's a dimmer switch, gradually progresses. If you feel you're anywhere on there beyond recreational you're not sure about, first thing I suggest you do is head over to either pivotalrecovery.org or the laurelcentre.co.uk and do one of the Am I an Addict self-assessment tests. Yeah, one of them, the one on the Laurel Centre, I feel like I should know, is the CSBD-19. So that's actually the assessment tool that was used across those 80,000 people in 42 different countries. So it's a very well-known, validated tool. The one on pivotalrecovery.org will tell you more about how much of an addiction you might have. So it will say, oh, you're at slightly problematic use, you might want to dial back right through to, okay, this is definitely a problem. So that will give you a sense of how severe it is. The first step is always acknowledging, okay, I think this is a problem. I need to do something different. I want to do something different. I think get educated about it, really begin to understand what the problem is. So I'm obviously going to plug my stuff here, but you can buy my book, Understanding and Treating Sex and Pornography Addiction. Does exactly what it says on the tin. Pivotal Recovery is the podcast series that is anonymous self-help. So that's 60 podcasts that you can download for the bargain price of 75 quid. And just work your way through pivotal recovery, or therapy, arrange to see a therapist. So Laurel Centre, or look at ATSAC, which is kind of the professional body for therapists in this field, and go and talk to somebody. Some people aren't ready to do that. That feels a bit sledgehammer to crack a nut, or they're a bit too embarrassed to do that. Others, if you've been struggling a long time, you may know that's what you need. You need to, come on a residential. You need to get yourself sorted quick. So it kind of depends on whereabouts you are on your own individual journey of discovery, I guess.
I'm going to include links to everything that you referenced there in the show notes as well, so people will be able to access that easily. Switching now, if I'm a partner in particular, or a friend, a family member, and there's a man in my life that's suffering from a porn addiction, how could I approach that conversation with him? Because obviously it would be a very sensitive topic and you want to do it the right way. And then once you've done that, what's the best way to provide ongoing support?
Yeah, so I mean, really, really tricky one. And I think for partners, I've literally this morning finished writing Pivotal for Partners. So that's the podcast series for helping partners. For partners, it depends how much you've been lied to and how much of a shock it is. How do I support my man in recovery? Frankly, might be the last thing you're thinking of right now. And actually, the best thing you can do to support them first and foremost is look after yourself anyway. The old thing about on the aircraft, first put on your own oxygen mask before helping others. Put on your own oxygen mask first, is what I'd be saying if you're a partner who's been really badly impacted by this. I mean, otherwise it's tricky, isn't it? Because if it's a family member, you or partner, you would notice if they're drinking too much. You would probably notice if it's drugs. You might notice pupils dilated, changes in behaviour, in sleep, and things like that. This one's really, really tricky. Chances are you won't know. You might know they're spending longer online on the computer. You might notice they turn the screen away, phones always put face down. They're kind of being a bit more defensive around devices. That might be a sign. But otherwise, it's going to be quite hard to know whether or not it is this. So I think the first thing is to start by saying what you are noticing. And it's by saying, look, I'm really worried about you. I'm really concerned about you. Compassion, empathy. It feels as though you're withdrawing a bit. It feels as though you're not as happy as you used to be. You seem to be more stressed. So, what is your evidence that something is going on? Be really, really truthful first about what it is you're seeing. And I'm worried about you. And I'm wondering if something is going on that I don't know about. I don't know if there's some, and maybe don't go straight into the addiction word. Is there some habit? Is there something going on that you're struggling with? And you might say, I don't know, is gambling becoming a bit of a problem maybe, or porn or something like that? But I think approaching it with kind of curiosity, I'm curious about it. I'm worried about you and I'm curious as to whether there's something else. And sometimes those conversations have to go around a few times. And I think I know what I often hear guys say, and I've been a therapist for 30 years, I heard this a long time, they feel ambushed. It's kind of, Simon, we need to talk. And it's like, oh, shit. The worst 3 words, we need to talk. Oh, it's 4 words, 4 words. And, don't ambush. I mean, to mention it in passing first. And then maybe, I'd like to talk later at some time when might be convenient or whatever, get a date in the diary. But I think don't ambush somebody, and compassion and say what it is that you're seeing.
Dr. Paula, my final question for you today, again, for anyone that's listening that might be struggling with this, what message of hope would you like to share with them where they might be feeling they're just completely stuck and there's no light at the end of the tunnel for them at the moment?
What's that Chinese proverb? I'm probably going to get this wrong. Could be Japanese, but it's something like fall down 11 times, get up 12. It's something like that. In my experience, most people, by the time they reach out for help, will have tried and failed on numerous occasions. And generally, in my experience, the reason they failed is because they've not been applying the right tools. So it's been thinking it's just about willpower. I just need to get my act together. It's just about willpower. It's not. Sometimes it's I just need to find something else to do that will be equally as enjoying. You probably won't, is the reality with addiction. So keep not being able to find the right thing. If you're not, one of the first things we do in Pivotal and on the residential is really begin to look and unpack at what it is that's maintaining this behaviour. So often people will talk about what's caused it, and maybe you're listening to this and you've got issues in childhood. You've got trauma. You know probably where this comes from. But what you don't understand is why that is still affecting you now today. So you end up beating yourself up for having the addiction and not moving on from whatever those issues were. But there is something that is still tying you to that. So, and once you can understand a problem, then you can develop the right tools and apply the right tools. So it's often about the psychoeducational piece. That's often the bit that's been missing. So I think that there's a very long way of saying, no matter how many times you may have tried and failed to do this, you still can do it. It is simply that you've not yet found the right key. And that's the bit that you've got to keep digging for, is to find the right key, and making sure to do that you are fighting the problem, not yourself. Don't beat yourself up about this. Got to make sure you keep on focusing on, right, haven't quite cracked it this time. How am I going to crack it next time?
Dr. Paula, thank you so much. I feel like with topics like this that have so much stigma attached to them, but are doing so much damage to people's lives, it's so important to talk about it and get educated on it. And as you were saying at the top of the piece, this is as big a problem as some of the addictions that we're more familiar with, like gambling.
Yeah.
So just being able to have these kind of conversations and let people know that, you know, it is okay and there will be a way through it is so important. And also, if you're a partner, how you can best support and how, as you said, which is very important, look after yourself while your partner might be going through this as well. So it's been a really important and intriguing conversation today. So thank you very much for that.
Very welcome. I've enjoyed it.